You know, I grew up in country like this. My dad and I would ride our horses up to these amazing high mountain lakes. We'd ride back into some pretty remote wilderness areas with incredible streams and meadows and wildlife. I love it here. Look at this canyon. It reminds me of the Grand Canyon. You've got this little stream, you've got these steep canyon walls. How long do you suppose it would take for a stream this small to remove this much material and cut the canyon this deep? This rock has a history, just like I do and just like you do. It came from somewhere. A lot of these rocks have been dated to be 350,000 years old, up to 2 million. That's pretty old. But it might surprise you to know that all of the geological formations that we see here, the canyons, the layers, even the plants, are younger than I am. When I was born, there was nothing here but a vast forest, hundreds of feet below where we're standing right now. In fact, before 1980, most people had never even heard of Mount St. Helens. It was in that year, on May the 18th, that molten rock created a steam blast with a force of 20 million tons of TNT. Avalanche debris and other flows from the eruption laid down all of those layers rapidly, up to 600 feet thick. A couple years later, there was some more volcanic activity that created a mud flow that cut out this entire canyon. It also cut through deep bedrock, all in a couple days. Isn't it amazing what a little bit of information from the past can do to help change your view of the present and the present world around you? There are a lot of assumptions made by a lot of people about the history of the earth around us. The question is, how do those assumptions affect how we view that history? But more importantly, how do they play into how we view science and the Bible? Did God create the world in a few days or billions of years? Is mankind descended from apes, or did God create us instantly in his image? Was there a global flood that destroyed the earth, or is that a myth? In other words, is Genesis history? When we think about the history of the earth, there are a lot of things we need to consider. But one of the most fascinating is the account of the flood. Was the whole earth covered with water? Genesis says the waters prevailed so mightily on the earth that all the high mountains under the whole heaven were covered. So if the flood was truly global, wouldn't there be a lot of evidence? I'd heard of a scientist who had spent over 40 years studying this question. When I spoke to him, he said he had a great place where we could see evidence for the global flood. Steve, I gotta admit, I've been here several times, but every time I come here, it is breathtaking.
Besides being at home, Grand Canyon is my favorite place on earth.
Yeah. So, Steve, tell me, what do you see here?
When we look at Grand Canyon, we see the inside story to the ground beneath our feet. And we kind of have a layer cake here, don't we, of strata that have been eroded for our benefit to see the inside structure of the earth. These same layers are also in Colorado. We're also in Illinois, also in Pennsylvania.
So when you say sedimentary strata, you're talking about the layers that we see?
Yes. So the lowest layers are formed first. Those are sediment grains that were mixed, separated, and flowed in here from different directions and accumulated one on top of another. And then, of course, naturally, they convert to rock.
So you're saying that the solid ground we're standing on right now, if we went back in its history, it'd be liquid?
Yes. So the ocean is doing some amazing things, and water of incredible power is depositing the layers we see in the canyon.
And are there fossils in all of those layers?
There are marine fossils through all the layers. But the standard explanation is there were 17 different advances and retreats of the ocean over the North American continent, and it was extended over hundreds of millions of years.
And what is the evidence that you see here that would say that doesn't seem to make sense?
The 4,000 feet of flat-lying strata in the canyon are flat, and relative to one another, we look in between the strata layers and we don't see the passage of time in between layers.
You mean erosion?
Erosion, especially, and channeling on any great scale is not visible. And then we look at the strata themselves, and they provide evidence of rapid, very rapid sedimentation. Just minutes or hours is all that's needed to make layers.
Well, tell me about the story of these layers. I mean, how did they get here?
In the 600th year of Noah's life, on the second month, the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up and the windows of heaven were opened. My understanding is the ocean floor upheaval occurred. Some type of magma or earthquake propelled the oceans over the continent.
So that's why we get these marine fossils in these layers.
Yes, and we have 6 months the waters prevailed upon the earth, another 7 months or so for the water to subside. The 4,000 feet of strata probably represents the early and middle part of the global flood right here in Grand Canyon. We have other strata locally in this Grand Canyon region. That's called the Grand Staircase. We have about 10,000 feet, 2 miles thickness of strata on top of the Grand Canyon.
Higher than where we are.
Higher than where we are. And that represents the later stages of the flood and the retreat of the floodwater. This surface was beveled by retreat of floodwaters. And as the flood retreated into the newly formed ocean basins, then the continents probably uplifted, and the ark, of course, was landed in the high country in the Middle East.
Well, there's some people who say that that record is about a local flood.
I believe it's a global flood, and all the high hills, or the whole heaven, were covered, a universal statement. But that mountains have risen since then, and we shouldn't measure the depth of the floodwaters by the present mountains of the earth, which are largely created during the flood and after the flood.
Well, the fact that we have all of these layers would be unknown to us if we were standing on them, somewhere else, but they're known to us because they've been cut out. How did that happen?
Well, it was the story that we all learned in grammar school. Okay, Colorado River, over tens of millions of years, cut the Grand Canyon. Most geologists have jettisoned that idea. It's hard to sustain a canyon like this for tens of millions of years. You can't imagine a canyon enduring that long with erosion.
Is that because
right
it would
here.
have eventually the sides would have collapsed and
Yes.
broken down? Then how in the world do we get this all carved out?
Well, there are lots of theories, and personally, I like the idea of catastrophic erosion by drainage of lakes.
So after the flood, we have these large bodies of water, these lakes that are trapped.
There's evidence of the big lake in the Painted Desert, a place called Hopi Buttes, about 500 cubic miles of water in this huge lake.
And so the dam breaks and all of that massive amount of water then is now pouring out and carving this.
Yes, and how long would it take to erode Grand Canyon? Maybe weeks, but not millions of years. Time is not a magic wand that solves all the geologic problems of the world. Jettison that way of thinking about millions of years and then start thinking about catastrophic process like you've seen at Mount St. Helens, and that'll help you understand Grand Canyon.
Everywhere we looked, Steve showed me evidence of the incredible power of moving water. It quickly laid down these enormous layers, then quickly eroded them away. Steve wanted to show me where the floodwaters first hit the continent, so he took me deeper into the canyon. Stephen, you said you were going to bring me to the bottom. You weren't kidding, were you? We're at the bottom, aren't we?
So we're in this big side canyon to the main Grand Canyon, and we're looking at the granite basement rock, which is the core of the continent, if you will. And then we see the flat-lying strata on top of it. The boundary between the granite rock below and the Tapete sandstone above is this surface we call the Great Unconformity.
Why does it appear to be such a stark line? I mean, it's clear.
I think it's an erosional boundary of colossal scale. we're looking at something that shows the magnitude of flood flow over a surface.
And is it just here?
The Great Unconformity is continent-wide. I've seen it, I believe, in the Middle East. It's over in Europe. It's in Africa, and here it is under the North American continent.
So we've got this layer. How thick is this layer? What goes up from here?
Well, we have the Sauk mega sequence here, if you will, 1,000 feet of sandstone, shale, limestone that goes continent-wide. There are 4 other big sequence packages of strata that sit above it. Those are also very continuous like this. What we're seeing here is rather representative of the rest of the world.
It makes one really question the notion that this all happened because of a small local flood. We're talking about something enormous.
The power-moving water was beveling and pulverizing rock, depositing great thicknesses of layers and calling our minds to think about a global flood.
The conventional story is entirely different, though. It would say that there is a lot of time between each of these layers.
Some people have said that the Great Unconformity boundary here represents 500 million years.
You mean between the granite we see and that first layer of the sedimentary rock?
Yeah, they say that there may be 500 million years there. Okay, and that's what their explanation of Earth history would ask them to consider. Yet when you come here and look at this, nearly a featureless plain. It's not exactly a plain, but it's a gently rolling surface. And would that be the product of billions of years? Or would that be the product of the power of water planing off a surface? Time is foreign to a good explanation here. And so we want to explain what we see. Everywhere we look, we see the power of water. And it's water on a colossal scale, and that's the story here in Grand Canyon. It's not a little water and a lot of time. It's a lot of water and a little time.
Time really is the central issue when talking about the history of the Earth. How much time did it take to form what we see around us? Is that a waterfall up there?
Yeah, big one. And that's a couple 100 feet high. And whole canyon 600 feet deep.
Have you been up there?
Yeah, that's a cool place.
Huh.
Yeah, you can see everything around the volcano there.
Yeah, and all this just scoured. Steve, it's absolutely beautiful here. That's just the peaceful, quiet, and almost overwhelming beauty. And yet, it wasn't always that way.
On May 18, 1980, a catastrophic geologic event occurred that not only shocked the world by its explosive power, but it challenged the way we're thinking about the origin of the Earth at its very foundation. That event is the eruption of this mountain here in Washington State 35 years ago.
So Steve, tell us about that. What happened on that day?
The eruption on May 18th was really a 9-hour event. And if you think about the 9-hour event, there were 7 different sub-events that were going on during that big event on May 18th. 17 seconds after 8:32 in the morning, there was a big earthquake, magnitude 5.1. It shook the north slope of the mountain. The oversteepened and cracked north slope began to slide, and it formed this gigantic rock fall that became mixed with atmosphere and gas and dispersed, and it became a debris avalanche. And this debris avalanche overtopped this ridge and went 10 miles from the volcano. And then behind that avalanche, the pressure inside the volcano was released, and super hot liquid water in the neck of the volcano expanded to steam, and it created this gigantic steam explosion, equivalent to 20,000 tons of TNT blast energy. That was directed not up, but northward over the landscape. And then we had the debris avalanche going into Spirit Lake, and the avalanche displaced the water of the lake up to 860 feet, creating this enormous or giant water wave on the lake. And then following that were mud flows. The heat of the explosion melted the snow and the ice around the volcano, and we had mud flows on 6 major rivers downstream. And then we had pyroclastic flows, especially on the afternoon of May 18th. the volcano erupted episodically, these frothed up liquid flows that came out. And then to follow the rest of the day, there was airfall debris, and we call that the pumice that fell out of the atmosphere. We call that airfall tephra. So that's the kind of the story of the 9-hour eruption on May 18th in summary.
There was a lot going on that day.
Yes.
Stephen, we were walking up here, you were telling me that before 1980, if we looked down there, we would see a lush forest, but it's a whole lot lower than what we see. This has all been filled in. What happened? How did all the material get here, and what do we learn from it?
Well, we have a lot of deposits, don't we? There's up to 600 feet of deposits here in this valley. It was sky before the eruption, and now look what's going on down there. Okay, that is an amazing thing, just thinking about that. So a lot of deposition, up to 600 feet of deposits, and then the way the erosion has occurred in this area, it allows the layers to be exposed, and so we can see the sequence of events that formed not just this ridge, but the valley. Mm-hmm. Some of these events occurred as much as 2 or 3 years after the 1980 eruption. And so every event left a fingerprint of something here on the landscape. So we have Earth's newest landscape, and we have all the knowledge from eyewitnesses and from photographs to put together the sequence of events here at the volcano.
So we have mud flows, we have pyroclastic flows, we have these explosion pits, we have erosion, and we look out here and we see there's a lot of character to this land.
Yes.
But it all occurred rapidly through these catastrophic events.
Yes.
What does that tell a geologist who now moves their vision from what happened here at Mount St. Helens and then begins to look around the world at the geological formations that we have around the world?
That's my story, is I came here and I'm looking around elsewhere and I see the application of erosion and deposition and those kind of processes that are here at the volcano to many other features of the Earth's surface. I have studied strata, and rapid strata formation here indicates rapid strata formation elsewhere. And rapid erosion features here are like erosion features that we thought require millions of years. And we thought that layers form slowly and gradually, but here at the volcano, they form rapidly.
What's the primary difference between your observations, as you see here, and the standard geological story, and what is that?
The standard geologic story is the present is the key to the past. We look at the present day process of slow and gradual, and then we think into that. That applies to geologic features of the Earth generally. But it really isn't the story. It's not the present is the key to the past, it's the catastrophic event is the key to the past. And so Mount St. Helens is a window to help us understand the catastrophic formations elsewhere on the Earth. So the present is not the key to the past, the catastrophic event that we're seeing is the key to the past.
Well, Steve, thanks for making me hike down here. This is an awesome place. Where are we?
We're on the North Fork of the Toutle River, upstream near the crater of Mount St. Helens, and we're in this area that's been profoundly impacted by the deposition and erosion associated with the volcanic eruption of 1980.
So are you saying that the ground we're standing on was not here 40 years ago?
Yeah, this was sky before the eruption in 1980. And so up to 600 feet of deposits have formed here. We just see the upper 100 feet of layers here. But
it's now been carved out for us so that we can look at it. You know, we can see some of those layers. And what do we see? What are we looking at?
Well, we're looking at mostly the bottom of the cliff over here. We're looking at the airfall deposit from May 18, 1980.
Is that the lower level that we see?
Yeah, the lower level.
It's kind of a massive and fragmental deposit. That's what was falling out of the atmosphere from the volcano late in the afternoon of May 18. Right around 4 o'clock in the afternoon is when the eruption subsided, and so that top of that layer there, about halfway up the cliff, is the last airfall debris from May 18, 1980. And then this area was impacted by buried ice. Underneath us was large glacial ice buried in the debris avalanche, and then what happens is steam is reaming a hole to the surface, and we're seeing a steam explosion occur in the coarse debris right about halfway up the cliff.
How long did that happen after May 18th?
The first week or so.
First week?
In the first week or so, there was a big pit here. It was 100 feet deep, it reamed out by steam. It was 2,000 feet long, 1,000 feet wide, and this gigantic pit was here. And then into that pit came the next deposits. On June 12th, 1980, about 9 p.m. to midnight, there was a big eruption of Mount St. Helens, another big eruption. And during that 3-hour period, there were enormous pyroclastic flows, high density, very hot slurries of volcanic ash that came out of the crater. This low area in the pit collected those volcanic ash layers. And so we see behind us, about halfway up the cliff to about 3/4 of the way up the cliff, we see a 25-foot thickness of layered volcanic ash. That's the pyroclastic flow deposit from June 12, 1980. And it formed just in the 3 hours there late in the evening. And then this pit sat here with the landslide debris and the other kinds of material, the volcanic ash all around it. And then mud flow of March 19th, 1982, that came down here at 90 miles an hour. It filled in this low area, the pit, with mud. And you're seeing the residue of the mud, about 25 feet in thickness there at the top of the cliff. As the mud came into this pit, it actually filled the pit with 100-foot thickness of mud. The pit was filled, and then what happened is the mud overtopped the debris dam that was downstream of here, and then it cut a spillway over the top of that dam, which cut back through here and gouged out the bottom of this pit and released the mud downstream. And so the canyon formed in a day on March 19th, 1982, by the drainage of the mud in this big pit through the debris avalanche.
So you sit here and you look at the complexity of the geological formations, and it would be easy for someone, if we just blindfolded them, brought them down here and took the blindfold off, to look around and think, as a lot of people do, man, this is really, really old. Look at all these different layers and all of this stuff that's going on, and yet each of these layers is laid down rapidly within a day and breached within a day. So you go around the world and you see those complex geological formations, and it's easy to see how rapidly they could have formed as well. Is that right?
Rapid stratification, rapid erosion. That's the story at Mount St. Helens, and it's the story around the world. I think there's plenty of application here to other geologic features of the Earth.
Andrew said when you study the rock formations, they show evidence of a young Earth transformed by a global catastrophe. So he took me south to Sedona to see it for myself.
The important thing to note is that this landscape is actually very stable. There was lots of erosion in the past to carve out this whole terrain, but those cliffs and the valley floor are very stable, which is why you've got the vegetation. Today, everything's much, much quieter. Today's processes are extremely slow, but they can't explain how we got this erosion, how we got these layers, how we got these cliffs.
All right, so you wanted to come here because you see evidence of a young Earth because of what's here. What do you see?
Yes, well, the first thing we notice is the extent of these layers. It's like a stack of pancakes. For example, the red unit that goes all the way across our field of view, that's the Schnebly Hill Formation. And above that, you can see the first white unit is the Coconino Sandstone. And above that, you've got the Turaweep, and at the horizon, you've got the Kaibab Limestone, which is the rim rock of the Grand Canyon. And, you know, here we are, 70 more miles from the Grand Canyon, and these layers are still here.
Yeah. It's almost hard to imagine the volume of material that represents.
Yes, take the Coconino Sandstone. We can trace it from here, right across New Mexico, Colorado, right over towards Kansas and Oklahoma, or even in Texas. We're talking at least 200,000 square miles for this one rock unit that's consistent for mile after mile after mile. That's not the scale that we see today with localised sedimentation. And to get it flat lying like this over such a large area, it's like you have to make your pancake all at once very rapidly. And so these layers show evidence of rapid sedimentation, the extent of these layers.
Well, Andrew, you were talking about that red formation, but that doesn't sound familiar to me.
No, that's the Schnebler Hill Formation. It's not in the Grand Canyon. In the Grand Canyon, we go from the Coconino into the Hermit Formation. There's that knife edge boundary, and there's no evidence of erosion there, which means that the Hermit Formation was rapidly deposited, and then immediately the Coconino was a deposit on top of it. But here, we've come 70 miles from the Grand Canyon, and we've got this Schnebler Hill Formation between the Coconino and the Hermit. And this Schnebler Hill Formation, 800 to 1,000 feet thick, over an area of 1,000 square miles, had to have been formed very rapidly. If that took millions of years, we ought to see millions of years, evidence of millions of years erosion back in the Grand Canyon at that same boundary. We don't. So that means that this Schnebler Hill Formation in this area had to form in a matter of hours. So it tells you that not only is there a lack of erosion, but there's no time between those boundaries. So the whole sequence of layers was very rapidly deposited.
So we have this large extent of layers. We have the lack of erosion between the layers. What other evidence do you see?
Well, if we look closely, for example, at the Coconino Sandstone, we see the bedding, that there's bands within it that are sloping. We call those cross beds. What they indicate is that you had underwater sand waves were moving along. The comparison is in a desert. It's important to recognise that there's a difference in the angle in a desert dune. It's usually 30 to 34 degrees of these sloping beds. Underwater, it's usually 25 degrees or less. And Dr. John Whitmore has combed the hills around here with his students, hundreds and hundreds of measurements of these cross beds. And they all come in the range of 15 to 25 degrees. So it was underwater deposition. And so these layers are accumulating in hours, weeks, and within months, you've got this whole stack of pancake layers over such wide areas.
So it isn't a difference in believing in those layers that exist.
Not at all.
It's the difference of time, isn't it?
Correct. It's not a question of science versus the Bible. When we're talking about the flood paradigm and the conventional paradigm, we're actually talking about two different views of Earth history.
The period before the flood and after the fall of man. It's a world that's different than the present. It's got the same natural laws going on, but it's a different set of critters, different set of plants. It's a little bit warmer Earth. The continents are in different positions from what they are now. It looks significantly different.
Well, that's what we see in Peter, where it talks about that world being destroyed. So the flood was not just soaking everything. This was radical change, wasn't it?
Yeah, if we're right about what we've understood so far, we got continents moving, smashing together, creating mountains. Mountains are rising to tens of thousands of feet. You've got water washing across entire continents. We're ripping tens of thousands of feet of sediment off of the old continents and then depositing thousands of feet of sediment on top of them again. We're looking at earthquakes of astonishing power